Yeah, hello and welcome to a new episode of our weekly Spielworxx chat. My name is Uli Blennemann. Although I'm in this industry for more than 25 years, from time to time I fall back into a childish fanboy mode. So this has happened at Conworks when Cole and Drew were my guests. This is happening today when the best writer in tabletop gaming, the one and only Dan Thurot, is my guest. So welcome, Dan. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me on, Uli.
Well, it's my pleasure. But then I think we have a technical problem because I'm not seeing. I see that I'm live, but I think we need to start over. So, no, there is now. I think it starts, but let me just check in the chat windows. People are coming. So, we are a little bit late. So, hi Marcus, good to see you. Did you see the start? Let me ask you this right from the start because I think I may have a technical problem. No, it seems to be that everything is okay. So, Dan, sorry for this. So, you see, I promised this will be low tech, and I immediately, well, promised. So, of course, with Dan, we could talk for 3 hours today, but we will
Yes.
stay roughly within the weekly Spielworxx chat limit, time limit, which is 30 plus minutes. But maybe, and I said this before to Dan when we chatted a little bit, Dan can now be my guest once a year, once a month, weekly. So we'll simply see. And by the way, if you do not know where to find Dan, I'm posting the URL now of his website in the chat window. So if you are not haven't checked out that site, please do so immediately. So now maybe not immediately. Please wait till we are finished. Um, and I just have one Spielworxx news item today and then I'm done. So the Crescent City Cargo and Captains of the Gulf Second Edition Kickstarter is live for another 3 days. So please check it out. And please support this great series of games by the fantastic Jason Dinger. And if you are already a backer, thank you very much. And let me also briefly post that URL to the Kickstarter, and then I'm done. I promise. Well, let's see. So hello Mo, by the way. So there is Mo Canales, the cost designer. But now back to you, Dan. Please give us some personal background of you first.
So my name is Dan Thurot. I write the board game review site Space Biff. My writing can be found a few other places, but that's pretty much me. I work as a historian most of the time. Right now, I actually am on sabbatical for the most part, theoretically. Um, I I still go in now and then. Um, but the reason is I had a new daughter about a year ago,
Mhm.
and I work in the afternoons, but I watch both of my daughters every morning,
Wonderful.
which which is a lot of fun.
Yes, so that is really wonderful. And by the way, if you have questions or comments, please put them into the chat window, and we may even respond. So could happen at least. And by the way, hello Chris, good to see you. Um, Today we will talk about narratives in gaming, and as you know, if you are regular viewers, it is a topic that is very close to my heart. But I have the advantage today that today Dan is doing the talking, so you can hear something from him, listen to him, and of course learn something from him. So first, Dan, what is narrative in gaming in your opinion? Of course, this is a broad thing.
It is a broad question, and some of it I think depends on whether we're speaking the vernacular or
Mhm.
whether we're speaking critically. If we're speaking vernacular, I think we have a very clear, maybe pure idea of what narrative is, where a board game explicitly tells you a story through its notes, its flavor text. Maybe it has an epilogue or character descriptions. Um, when I think about narrative in gaming, I think more about um, like rhetorical modes.
Hmm.
So, um,
So
and
let me immediately interrupt. What is a rhetorical mode here? What does this mean?
that's a great question. So it would be how do we express something to each other as people?
Hmm.
Um, and so, for example, in a game, I would have to ask a question: when is the game happening?
Hmm.
So is a game the physical artifact that's on
Hmm.
your table, that's been packaged, that's been shrink wrapped? Is that the game? Or
Hmm.
is the game the act of playing the game?
Hmm.
Um, if I'm thinking of the game as a physical artifact, then I don't think it has a narrative at all.
Right,
Um,
right. Hmm.
it may have exposition, it may have description, it may even have an argument.
Hmm.
But until it is actually played, until we are touching the thing,
Hmm.
until we're playing with each other, then it has a narrative, and it can't help but have a narrative because humans, everything is a narrative.
Yeah.
We just put things into order.
Yeah, so oral storytelling is, of course, the earliest method for sharing stories and for narrative. So yes, I think when we are engaging, we will do some narrative. But are games
Yeah.
a good form for this? Are they good in giving you a narrative, informing a narrative, or are they more awkward? Is it difficult?
I think it depends on one's approach. I actually think board games are an incredible medium for enabling narrative.
Mm,
I don't know if they're a good medium for telling a narrative of their own accord.
mm,
Um, but as humans, we can't help but see patterns and invent stories about ourselves. Sometimes it even goes to an extreme. Like gambler's fallacy. You place a bet and you lose and you lose and you lose. So you tell yourself, well, surely I'm going to win.
mm,
And then you lose. Um, we see stories in everything around us. Um, and board games are wonderful for enabling that. But when we talk about something like a rhetorical mode, to me, a board game is what I said before. It's exposition. It's describing the parameters of a narrative more than it is the narrative itself. Um, but it enables us to create a narrative. If you and I sat down to play a game, we would both be creating a narrative.
yeah,
That narrative might be the same narrative. It might be a different narrative.
yes.
um, Maybe your narrative is, man, Dan didn't wear deodorant today. I'm having the worst day. And my narrative is, Uli is such a gentleman and he's
uh,
so polite and I'm having a great time. Our narrative might be very different, and both are informed by our engagement with this thing that we've put on the table between us,
yeah,
which I think is absolutely wonderful. I love that capacity of games to make us tell stories to ourselves and to each other.
yes, I totally agree. And there is already a good comment here in the chat window from Daniel Newman, designer. Good to see you. And the distinction, he says, the distinction between exposition and narrative is very important and totally overlooked when talking about board games. And I agree. It's often overlooked. I would say so. And Mo saying I invent stories about myself all the time, and I guess not only while you're gaming. So, yeah, but I think yeah, games are wonderful in telling stories, and I think I even mentioned this before here in my stream. When I'm playing a game like Here I Stand, so maybe once a year, then I'm totally immersed, and in my head, I'm a Hollywood B movie director, and I can
Sure.
and I'm doing stuff over there. So it's wonderful, and maybe I'm I'm talking about this experience for weeks or for months. So it's very important for me. But then, so do games do a narrative generally well or not? Or is it dependent on the gamer, on the person? So, or how do you see this?
That's a great question. So, kind of like the other Daniel was pointing out, we sometimes see games that stumble when they have friction between exposition and narrative. I mean, so an example would be I was playing a game about a year ago that we still laugh about sometimes because it was one of those Fantasy Flight, Terranoth setting games where you read a lot of flavor text. Your characters have these big descriptions about who they are, and we reached the final boss and we flipped the card and it told us there's this terrible monster. It's very scary. It's destroyed villages. It killed hundreds of people. And then because we had collected the resources necessary to face this monster, we had the right items, we had the right counters, we just stomped it.
Mhm.
It was like a rabbit meeting a semi truck. There was no contest. We just ran over it. And and here's a case where the game's exposition was saying one thing and the narrative that we were building was completely at odds with that and so humorous because it was so at odds that it was like showing up and just blowing over the dragon Smaug, no trouble whatsoever. um, and so in general I'm a little wary of games that think that creating a narrative is telling a story to me instead of creating the conditions under which I can tell my own story. And there are some games that do a wonderful job at telling me helping me tell my own story. Sometimes they're even the same game. I don't want to pick on Fantasy Flight, but one time we were playing Mansions of Madness,
Mhm.
which we were walking around looking for clues, and we beat a scary monster. We beat a Shoggoth, which in the books we shouldn't be able to defeat a Shoggoth, but we beat it, and then we got lost and we were wandering around the halls of this mansion and we couldn't find a clue. And just because of that, the dungeon master was sending little trash mobs at us, just zombies and cultists, and they were causing us real trouble where this big monster hadn't. And that became our narrative. That the game not only had problems with narrative, but it did this really good job about telling a story that was in a way more true to its setting. That we got lost in a house and we couldn't find our way out. So sometimes the same game can do narrative poorly or better just because of its disparate elements.
Yes. I certainly agree. And Daniel Newman is also making another good comment, and I won't repeat it here completely. I just want to mention it to you. What do you think about, as a question, what do you think about flavor text on cards? So a lot of
Ugh,
we don't want to pick on Fantasy Flight. Lots of other companies are doing this as well. So you have your fantasy type game, and you have your ratings and values, and then you have flavor text. What do you think about this? Is it helpful for a story? Is it necessary? Is it even hindering, or how do you see it?
that is one of those things where you see italics and you immediately zone out, don't you?
Yeah,
Um,
right.
for me, again, it depends on the game. If it's a historical game, and for instance, Cole Worley's Pax Pamir,
Yes.
I'm very interested. Some of those cards, I don't know who they are. I don't know the historical context, and I love reading that little bit of flavor text for context. If I'm playing an adventure game and the game wants to tell me about a skeleton's creaking bones, or I could do without that. I don't care about those.
Yeah.
Um,
I certainly agree, and really when and Daniel here in the chat is saying the same thing. When he sees italics, then he's out, and often I'm the same. And yes, only in some
sure.
games I will read the text because, like in Pax Pamir, I didn't knew anything about the Russians. There are some Russian spies, but I found it
Sure.
interesting that there is some flavor text that enhances your narrative. And but do you have some examples of games that tell a wonderful story, or is it too difficult because it's so depending on the game group?
Let's see. Well, so I've recently reviewed and played a number of games that I think tell very great stories, sometimes even important stories. Um, So just the other day, for instance, I wrote about Pierre Sylvester's "The King is Dead,"
Yes. Hmm.
which I think is great at telling a particular type of story,
Yes.
um, but it is contingent on the people at the table. We played it just the other night with somebody who had never played it before, and some of his fumbling led to a situation where I could see the end coming about six battles in advance and was able to manipulate things in my favor. And that's a narrative.
Yes.
That's a game where experience should bestow an advantage, and it did.
Yeah.
And hopefully, my friend didn't have a bad time. I mean, his story that he was telling himself was probably about how lost and floundering he was, and how much he regretted trying to seize the crown because he got demoted to latrine cleaner or something. Um, in my new reign. But that's an example. Mark Herman and Jeff Engelstein's Versailles 1919 we played recently,
Mhm.
and my friend Evan was playing with us, and he got totally shut out of the negotiations, and everyone was mad, and he felt maybe a little disappointed. Um, well, he was playing as Italy, and when he got shut out of the negotiations, he felt like a country that wasn't able to chart its own destiny. Um, the game you recently published from Mo Canales, The Cost, I think, tells stories.
Yes, it does.
Sometimes, no,
Please
go ahead.
continue. No, just wanted to give a big thank you to Mo for this wonderful game over here. So please back to you, Dan.
Well, yeah, that's it. Might not be a narrative in the sense that we sometimes think of it with an arc, with character development.
Absolutely.
But I think that there is character development if we remember that in a board game, you're the character. Um, I've played the cost a number of times where people began with this attitude that, oh, I'm going to inflict as much damage as I can to my workers because I want to profit. And then they see the way their investments stop paying out because countries close. Um, that's character development. That's development over the course of the game when they're realizing, not to invoke the title too much, but they're realizing the cost of their actions,
Yeah.
that there are consequences they've incurred that even in the course of an hour and a half game have to be paid later. Um, and that can be exciting. Sometimes that only happens when you're learning the game. Other times it happens because of the developing game state. But yeah, that's character development. Now, it might not be as nuanced or as insightful to the human condition as a film or a novel, but it
Mhm.
can be very insightful about models or about
Absolutely.
systems. I play a game like The Cost, and to me, it's a very moral game, as I've written, and not because it's telling the player to be moral, but because it's showing you that an amoral corporation needs outside incentives sometimes to prompt it to act morally.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah. Yeah, and just hello Ash, by the way, and she says that flavor text are important to me only in educational games, and only if
sure.
I'm learning something from it. Yes, 100% agreement. But then I want to come back just for a brief second to The King is Dead by Pear. Because I mentioned Here I Stand earlier, and Here I Stand, of course, as you may know, has 40 plus pages of rules. So
Yeah.
in there, you have a good setting. The setting is there. Whereas the King is Dead is so lean, There is not so, but you're still, I think, and that makes it a truly outstanding game experience because without having 40 pages of rules and telling you you are Charles the Fifth or you are that emperor, you are that, it still tells you a story, and within a couple of minutes you are you are really in and
Yeah.
caught by the game. So I think the King is Dead. Viewers, if you have a chance, please try it out. It's not a game. I'm not saying this where you need, maybe you need to play it twice or three times to really see what it can achieve. But fortunately, the playing time is that short that you easily can will manage this. Yeah. And Matt Wolf, hello Matt. By the way, The King is Dead is amazing. A knife fight in a phone booth feel. Yeah, well, that is nicely said. And but getting back to you, as I said, you have to do the talking. So
Uh,
yeah, so in your opinion, storytelling in games is important, or sometimes can you are you willing to play a game that isn't telling a story, an abstract game, or are the abstract games also tell you a story? For example, if we are playing chess, there could still be a story, or how do you see it then?
that's a great question, and I think we should say first that I feel there's an unfortunate attitude that unless board games are a medium that can do well what other mediums do,
Yeah.
that they must not be mature as an art form. And I think nothing could be further from the truth. Board games have their own advantages.
Yes.
And I think there are two advantages that come to mind with your question. The first is um, that Here I Stand is a wonderful example. Here I Stand isn't so much about its characters as it is about this broad simulation that shows you what it's like to be an actor in Europe um, during the Protestant Reformation. And here is why its actors made the decisions they did, that they were products of their environment. There were enormous pressures on them, and so it does this great job of showing us a model and a system and how we can interact with that. But the other thing board games do very well is that there's a story taking place above the table. I actually have just right here on my wall, and maybe I'll grab it and show it to you.
Please do so.
Um, so this is a chess game,
Mm-hmm.
and my grandfather, when I was young, he taught me chess,
Mm-hmm.
and he was very good at chess, and I was a kid, so I was terrible at chess. And I played with my grandfather probably 100 games, and I lost 100 games. Um, and then I won. And the first time I won, I was 11 years old, and this is the checkmate that I put my grandfather into.
That's awesome.
And I don't remember every move, but I remember two moves. I remember when I put his queen into a checkmate of its own, where he was forced to sacrifice his queen or lose it. And I remember the checkmate, but I remember where we were sitting. I remember who was there. My parents and my sisters were sitting around the couch as we played on the table. I remember the temperature in the air. I remember my grandfather being both frustrated and proud of me. Um, and that's a story.
It is even a wonderful story. And thank you
Oh, well, that's
for
kind of you.
sharing this. And there is Meeple Pete in the chat. Good to see you. And he's also saying it's a very nice memory. And Daniel also good story. Ash is saying this. So thank you for sharing this. And also you have answered a part of my question. Even an abstract game, and chess, of course, is an abstract game, can give you memories that you're not forgetting and telling you a story.
Yeah.
So wonderful, wonderful. Yeah. Um. So and a little bit related to this. So you are playing with your game group with 2 players or 4 players or 6 players, and of course there is a story. There's a narrative. But does this story narrative have any meaning outside of this group? Or and in addition, if not, does it matter at all? Or like your chess story, probably the answer is already there. So
Yeah, one of the things that I'm fascinated about is I have a friend who does he works in brain scans, and he's on the research side. And he's done a lot of studies on just how much we put things into patterns. Um, he once mentioned to me that we have a mild cognitive hiccup called apophenia. And it's one of the things that makes us very human, in that you can look at a cloud and see a face.
mm-hmm.
But sometimes it goes wrong. And that can be called pareidolia, or like I mentioned earlier, the gambler's fallacy, where you start to see patterns in too many things.
Mm-hmm.
So your question for me sparks a memory of a time when I had a friend who we were having a rough patch. We had been old friends and we couldn't play games together anymore because we just butted heads too much. And every game that I played with this friend became the story instead of the story the game was trying to enable. It became the story of us hitting each other, and no matter how bad it was for us, no matter how much it ruined the negotiations of the game, we would sacrifice victory to attack each other. And so eventually things smoothed out, but it required for a little while we didn't play games together. At least we would play cooperative games. um, but yeah, the narrative that we're telling, both on the table and above it, I think is tremendously important. I think there's a reason that so many board gamers happen to be storytellers and vice
Yes.
versa.
Yes.
Um, I think we see it all the time when people write a session report.
Mm-hmm.
They're telling you a story about what happened in their game, and I think that's exciting.
Yes.
Um, the best reviews to me are games that tell you a little bit not about the rules, but about the stories that the rules created. That's one of the things I love about board games.
Absolutely, absolutely. This is what brings me into this hobby as well. And years ago, I had problems with abstract games. So although I was in my teenage years, I was a chess player, but I didn't like them. But more and more, I don't care that much
Hmm.
anymore. Although what is for me still important to this day, and that this is why I prefer games with a strong theme, is they for two reasons I love them, because they draw me into the game, so it is easier for me to get this immersion. And if I can compare real life things to things that are happening in the game, this makes rules learning easier. uh,
Yeah.
for me, this is another aspect that is important to me. So getting back to one question, so do you have one game that is a really good storyteller, or are you saying there are so many and it depends more on my mood? Is mood important for a good game story, or?
Well, so you told me I would get 50 euros if I said the cost.
Yes. But you know that it will take another month. But
Oh,
the
okay.
money will arrive. The money will arrive.
Okay. Um, I think the strongest story that I've gotten from a game lately, and there are so many, designers have really learned how to harness that context that you're talking about. Our tendency to put things into order. Um, that I feel like we are seeing so many wonderful games at telling stories. But the one that really stands out to me is John Perry's Scapegoat, which only just released,
Mhm.
and it's a social deduction game. Which when you first hear that, at least for me, I go, "Oh, another one of these."
Yes.
They are so overdone. Um, but it does something really clever where instead of wondering about everyone else's identity, you're not sure of your own identity, and it's closer to me, to something like Reservoir Dogs by Quentin Tarantino, where you know is everyone suspecting me of being the
Yeah.
traitor? Am I the one who everyone is secretly gunning for? It creates this atmosphere of paranoia and tension that is, I think, has disappeared from too many social deduction games because they've become logic puzzles.
Yes.
Um, and Scapegoat, I have some great memories already just from the last month of playing it with family members at a birthday party, socially distanced, masked, but kind of at a very big table. And with the mask, you're struggling to see all of the facial expressions, which added yet another layer of paranoia. Um, and I loved it. It created great stories for me, um, in part because wondering, can I trust someone who I know really well, like my sister or my spouse, my wife? Suddenly, I can't see part of her face. I'm wondering, can I trust her? And it comes down to how well I know them, how well I can gauge what I have learned about them, growing up with them or having been married for 12 years. And I love that.
Yes. Yes. This sounds good. So the title is Scapegoat, and this game is only out for a short time, or is it out for longer?
I think it's only been out for a couple of weeks. Um, I don't know if it's actually reached all of the shops yet.
Okay.
It might depend on where you are. So I think in North America it's in shops, but Europe and Canada and everywhere else they're still waiting.
Yeah, I will check it out when it arrives here. So Daniel in the stream is saying I had one amazing game of Panic Station once, and every other time I played it was miserable. But I still have a great story to tell from that one play. Yes, of course, this
Yeah,
is happening as well. Sometimes it's the spark is not there. So sometimes it's not happening. And of course, let's face it. Um, I rather play. Somewhat mediocre game with a great group than a great game with a group where I'm already know after 15 minutes, well, that player maybe is this won't be that much fun. So I think as long as the group is good, there will be some narrative in the game or by the game.
yeah.
Um, so and you mentioned this earlier, Dan. Games are a special media. They are more like artifacts. So is this the main reason why you are playing games, tabletop games, or why are you playing games? It's not only for the stories, or is it for the story, just for the stories?
That's a good question. I don't know if I could give a good answer because for me, one of the main reasons I play games is to write about them. Um,
Okay.
for me, the hobby is very much about playing a game so I can write about it. That's the part I really love. In writing about a board game, it becomes clear to me. I sometimes after a game we sit and discuss it, and sometimes and this is very awkward for me, but sometimes we'll have a newcomer who says, "Oh, so tell me your insights about the game." And to me, I'm going, I have none because I haven't written about it yet. It's in that process that the game begins to make sense to me. Um, but that's one of the things I adore about this hobby is just that capacity to play something and then think about it. I love how many people are engaged with board game media. Um, Even if sometimes I don't love the way we tend to format reviews, I love that a lot of people are doing that same process, that it's very natural for us as board game players and as storytellers to want to share what mattered to us at the table with other people. Um, and I'm sure that's something that, so when you, Uli, when you're looking at, when people are pitching you games, I bet you get a lot of pitches and you get to sit down and play the game. Are you thinking primarily about narrative? What is it that you're thinking about when someone is showing you their game for the first time?
This is a really, really interesting question because it depends. So sometimes I immediately are so immersed that I'm thinking about the narrative. Even if it's my first prototype, I'm totally forgetting it. So I think, wow, this is that and this is that. Sometimes I'm thinking about, and this may be a professional problem that I'm having, that how is this working? Ah, no, I think instead of three, this should be a four or a five. And this immediately kills a part of the story for me. And this is
Yeah,
also true if I'm playing other other companies' games. So for the first time, especially. So I have them on the table. I want to learn something about them, or people have told me, "This is a great game. Let's play." And of course, I know everything better. This is a natural, so I'm immediately saying they have played this 50 times and they have developed the game, they have tested the game. I'm seeing
yeah,
it 10 minutes in the game. I'm saying, what's this? And now I would have done it this way. This sometimes is something that I would like to avoid because for me it kills the story at this point, and it may even kill it for the whole group because I need to talk about this. I immediately need to talk about this, and
yeah,
it's strange, but narratives to me have a huge importance. So, as you may know, I started as a wargamer, and there it's definitely you're not in the game for the mechanics because at that time when I started, it was moving, combat, reinforcements all over. So just
yeah.
process. Yeah. And Daniel Newman is saying it can be hard to turn off that developer brain when you're playing for fun. It is, but still, games are very special to me. Although I'm a lover of books, so I'm reading a lot and I play video games as well, but tabletop games are something that is really, really special to me. So, and Matt is saying, Uli, you are describing exactly what I go through when I play a game. Yeah, I think this is a developer and designer brain. Dan, anything you'd like to add to this right now? Do you have anything in mind? We have time.
We have time. No, I agree. Sometimes a game will have so many issues that, yeah, I can't help but think, what am I going to write about this? Both positively and negatively. Sometimes a game is so good that I get excited more about the future than staying in the moment, which is one of the things I like about board games is how it forces us into the moment. So anytime I'm out of the moment, I think that acts to the game's detriment, unfortunately.
Yeah, this is absolutely true. I totally understand. And I have to answer here a very important question, an earlier one by Matt. Where does the name Space Biff come from?
Oh, okay. I wish I had a good answer. When I first started writing my site, it was really just it was to practice writing. It was to stay up to date, and I needed a title. And originally, I didn't own the URL for spacebiff.com. It was just Thurot.com,
Mhm.
and I didn't want Thoreau as the header. It seemed pretentious. It seemed like an ego thing. Um, so I thought about a spaceship shooting a spaceship, and that's a space biff. Um, so I put that as the placeholder, and then by the time I thought maybe I should
Just
make
keep
it
it. Yeah.
a board game thing, it had caught on, and so I just bought the URL and kept it Space Biff. So that's I wish I had a more exciting answer, but that's the answer that I have.
I think that is a very, very good answer. And before we close here, so I because you are Biff, Space Biff, I have my own Biff over here. This is not made up, so maybe you can see him.
Oh, hello,
So
Biff.
I have lots of them, and this is a sorrow eater. And his name actually for years is Biff, not Space Biff, but his name is Biff, even by the manufacturer. It's Biff. So Biff. So and he's actually excited to be on camera here. So
Well, that's wonderful. I'm nice. I'm always happy to meet another Biff.
yeah. Um, so thank you very much, Dan. Here, I really, really would love to have you again. We will think about a topic then, maybe next year sometimes. I love that. And there's another question. I had a gamer nick for almost a decade that I created by smashing random keys. Yeah, well, that is also good.
There we go. Yeah.
Um,
Well,
so,
thank you so much, Uli.
yeah, this was not only excellent for me as a fanboy, but hopefully also interesting for the viewers. And next week we will have a regular Spielworxx chat episode. So with me presenting some Spielworxx and industry news. And to everyone, thank you for your time. If you would like to ask a question in advance or mention a topic that I should bring up next week, please drop me an email at uli@spielworxx.de, uli@spielworxx.de. And till then, bleibt gesund, Black Lives Matter. Bye bye. Bye.
Okay.